You know, about 40 years ago, 40 years ago, I was a member of a number of secret societies that taught that the lost years of Jesus, that is, about the time of his 12th or 13th year to his 30th year, plus 30 maybe plus, were spent journeying to, living in, and studying in India. Now, they also taught that Jesus didn't die on the cross, but was nursed by his family back to life, whereupon, after he recovered, he returned to India and was buried there. Now, we've touched on this topic several times on 21st Century Radio, but it wasn't until the year 2000 that we interviewed Ed Martin on this important research, and his just published then book called King of Travelers, Jesus' Lost Years in India. Now, here we are 9 years later, and Ed Martin's work has been expanded in 2 ways. He has an updated book called Jesus in India, King of Wisdom, and a film by Paul David's Jesus in India. And in my opinion, this film and this book are the best research on this topic. And if you have the courage to seek the truth, then it's a necessary read or watch. I wish I would have had these in my hands 40 years ago, because all of the stuff that we learned in these various societies were secret. We weren't allowed to talk about it. And we were always looking for another source, which was a good documented source. Now we got one. We don't have to worry about that. Just forget that secret societies teach that, friends. It doesn't matter anymore. Well, you know, courage is what you need, because the author of this book, Edward T. Martin, needed a great deal of it. Why? Well, because he was a former fundamentalist from Texas who was ousted from his church for asking unwelcome questions. Now, what kind of unwelcome questions were they? Well, listen to this. Well, actually, basically, this was the answer. He said, if God wanted you to know that, it would have been in the Bible, he was told. So stick to worrying about your own salvation. But that wasn't good enough for Edward T. Martin, who undertook a seeker's quest across 4,000 miles of India in search of answers and evidence about where Jesus was during the hidden years from ages 12 to 30. And I think joining us, joining us right now is the man who had the courage to do the film. His name is Paul Davids, but he's a courageous soul. He always has been. Just listen to this. Paul Davids was Marvel Productions coordinator for the original The Transformers TV series, and many episodes of which he wrote. And he went on to executive producer of and co-write Showtime's now classic film, Roswell, in 1994, which was nominated for a Golden Globe as Best Motion Picture for Television. He made his directional debut, or debut, as we used to say in the old days, with the feature documentary Timothy Leary's Dead in 1997, and I've never seen it. Now, the husband and wife team of Paul and Hollis Davids are also noted for authoring 6 of the million-selling Star Wars sequel books in the early 1990s for Lucasfilm. Paul Davids also wrote and directed Starry Night, The Artist and the Shaman, The Sci-Fi Boys, and the latter of which won the prestigious Saturn Award in Hollywood from the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror as Best DVD of 2006. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio, and it's only been, Paul, 14 years.
I think so, Bob, and I think my resume is getting too long.
Yeah, well, that's why we had to edit this down. I mean, this was edited.
I'm too old. I've done too much.
Well, maybe you shouldn't do so much. Maybe you should take a vacation.
But it has been, 1994 is when Roswell came out on Showtime. And I remember you and I had quite an interview at that time about the Roswell incident.
Well, of course, the Roswell incident was just made up by a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
Right. Now, there's nothing that can be concerned about that.
Yeah, it wasn't even a weather balloon. I hear it was a balsa wood kite.
It was all made up.
Yeah.
It was all made up, and to just take a look.
Somebody threw a hubcap.
Oh, well, look, now we're having an astronaut coming out and actually telling us that UFOs exist. What's going on around here?
Edgar C. Mitchell. And he's not only announced that there has been contact with aliens and there has been a cover-up, but are you surprised that neither the New York Times nor the Wall Street Journal even printed it?
Well, the New York Times.
This man has walked on the moon longer than any other human being alive. There's only a handful of people that ever did walk on the moon, and he's not news, you see.
Well, you know how the nasty negatives always talk about astronauts who see UFOs?
Yeah.
They just said they're space jockeys. Come on. All they are is they go around and fly jets and stuff. I mean, you know, the way they debunk you is so pathetic. I mean, you know.
Well, you know, I've gotten used to the debunking over the years.
Well, it's about time.
You know, you mentioned I did a film on Timothy Leary. Roswell certainly got its round of debunking. And now Jesus in India, actually, it's really been nicely embraced by a lot of people who feel that it has expanded their awareness. And I do think this film is a very even-tempered and fair film in that it gives all sides of the argument a chance to air their point of view while pursuing what we think may be the best evidence to fill in the lost years of Jesus. And it took a lot of work and thousands of miles of travel and a lot of serendipity to get into places that Westerners usually are not welcome and are not permitted to film.
I'll say I was real. That's what is so exciting about this.
I'm glad you love the film. Hey, listen, let me start out with a plug because some people might be, you know, online and they need to know that Jesus in India the movie.com is where it's all happening with this film. And Jesus in India the movie.com. We now have the DVD out after it's been on Sundance Channel now 5 times in the U.S. And Showtime just showed it 4 times in Australia for Easter.
Well, that's what I love about cable television. I mean,
it reaches a lot of people.
Yeah, not just that, but sometimes they may put your film on for an entire day. No, the stuff that we've done for History Channel and National Geographic and Discovery, they've repeated them sometimes half a day.
Uncensored, no advertisements. It was really good having it on TV. But for the DVD, I added an extra 80 minutes. I think, 80 minutes of bonus material. So am I exhausted after being on this for 4 years? You bet.
Well, yeah, 4,000 miles. 4,000 miles. And
in the heat. In the worst time of the year. It just worked out that we had to go in the summer and film in the summer. And the heat it's like being in Iraq in the summer. And the humidity, it's oppressive, and then come the monsoons and the washed-out roads and the terrorists, because we had some close brush-ups with terrorism. We went to some dangerous places to film this too, but we did it. We just pressed ahead, and doors kept opening for us, and I really hope a lot of people will take a look at what we offer and what the evidence is.
Well, they gotta, because this is, I think, going to be mainstream in a decade or two. If you don't mind my saying.
You think it's going to take that long?
Look, when you have the New York Times who won't even focus on this kind of stuff, of course it will.
Yeah.
These are
Bob,
very...
14 years ago, when you and I were talking about Roswell, did you still think that they'd be, not telling the truth about it even now? I thought...
You're right, and I wouldn't have thought that. I would have thought they would have been too embarrassed to keep lying like that. I mean, that's the sickness that we're involved in now.
Now they're too embarrassed to admit how embarrassed they are.
All right, now let's get now into the reasoning as to why this is an extremely important film.
Yeah,
and I know we're coming up on a break now, but first of all, I'm just going to kind of introduce this question, and then you're going to study up on it because you probably we don't have to. We don't have to go to that break. Okay, we've got enough time.
You see what happened, Bob? Your sponsor heard what this is about and just pulled out on you.
I'm always overruled. And that's okay with me because lots of times I'm wrong. Now, very much appreciated is the quality of research that you guys demanded to, and that you gathered key authorities on this controversial topic, and parts of especially. Would you briefly summarize Ed Martin's views on Jesus in India? That is, how did he get there? Why did he go? And generally where he went. because this is we're going to lay the playing field here, because that's the most important topics as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, well, you stated the basic problem, which is that the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, don't talk about Jesus from the age of 12 to 30. There's only one sentence in Luke that covers 18 years of the life of Jesus Christ. And that one sentence says, and Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. End of story. Now, in film, we call something like that a jump cut. That's something, you've left a lot of the story on the cutting room floor. Why? Everybody wonders why. It really bothered Ed. And he began to become familiar with some of the esoteric and non-esoteric writings, claiming that Jesus spent at least part of those years in India. Of course, he came across the writings of Edgar Cayce, America's sleeping prophet, who did have readings about Jesus that placed Jesus in India for part of those years. He came across the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ by Civil War soldier Levi Dowling. Now, this, of course, it was a channeled book, and channeling on the long list of credibility for me has always been toward the bottom of the list.
Well,
how is it channeled? Where does it come from?
Right.
But it's interesting material that has a lot of detail to it, and specifically mentions Jesus having been at the Jagannath in Puri, India, which is on the East Coast. This becomes an interesting little key in the puzzle. But the most juicy and tantalizing piece of this puzzle comes from a Russian who in 1887 was at a monastery 14,000 feet up in the Himalayas. His name was Nicholas Notovich. He's an explorer. He has an accident there on his horse. He breaks a leg. He spends weeks and weeks there recovering. He gains the confidence and trust and help and care of the Buddhist lamas, or monks, who are there. They have many ancient documents at the Himas Monastery, and they present to him ancient scrolls called The Life of Saint Issa, the Best of the Sons of Men. Now, here, this is the core of the mystery right now about those missing 18 years. Who is Saint Issa? That is Jesus. Issa is the name for Jesus among not only the Muslims, not only the Hindus, but also the Buddhists. They call him Saint Issa. And if you listened to Rick Warren's benediction at the inauguration of Barack Obama, he referred to Jesus at one point as Issa in that benediction. It was the first time many Americans may have even heard the name. Now, why The Life of Saint Issa, the Best of the Sons of Men? It's purportedly hundreds of years old, that manuscript, having been copied and recopied from manuscripts that go back 2,000 years to just after the crucifixion. We don't have that manuscript to test its age. But what we do know is that Nicholas Notovich translated it, he published it against the advice of a cardinal that he knew from the Catholic Church who said, bury this, and he was debunked viciously. He was, assaulted. His integrity was besmirched. They called him a liar. They accused him of making the whole thing up, but he didn't. And if you go on the Internet today, you'll find all kinds of Internet sites that still, from an Orthodox Christian point of view, still try to debunk Notovich and claim that he made it all up. But it's not true that he did. Our journey to India took us, for example, to Calcutta at the Ramakrishna Vedanta Math, which is where a famous, reputable Swami, who's authored many books, Swami Abhedananda, lived. And about 25 years after Notovich was at the Himas Monastery, he went there too, trying to get the answer on this manuscript. They showed it to him. He translated it again. Guess what? Same translation. Oh, a few words, a little different here and there around the edges. But not only did he see it, but now we track it, and in our film you'll see this, to a Russian painter in 1926. This is a really interesting guy, Nicholas Roerich.
We're going to pause here for our first break. We'll return with Nicholas Roerich, and this fellow is really key, not just in regards to this particular area, but in the Great Seal of the United States. He was the individual that was inspiring those, Henry Asgard Wallace, FDR, our president, and others, Morgenthau, to put the reverse of the Great Seal, the pyramid in the eye and the triangle, on the back of the $1 bill. We'll be back with our guest, Paul Davids, Jesus in India, a 2008 film based on the book by Edward Martin.
Hello, this is Tom McNear, a remote viewing student of the great psychic Ingo Swann and an original member of the Army's Stargate Psychic Program. You are listening to the amazing 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronimus.
Okay, our guest, of course, for the remainder of the program is Paul Davids, Jesus in India, a 2008 film based on the book by Edward Martin, but the new book actually is not King of Travelers, but Jesus in India, King of Wisdom, the making of the film and the new findings on Jesus' lost years. JesusInIndiaTheMovie.com. Go to JesusInIndiaTheMovie.com. And, of course, we had just touched on Nicholas Roerich, who is hated by fundamentalists more than just about anybody on the planet for all kinds of reasons. All kind of stupid reasons, but they don't like this guy. Tell us about Nicholas Roerich's possible influence here in 1926.
Okay, well, first let me tell you who he was. He was a Russian explorer and remarkable painter. He painted probably more than 2,000 paintings in the Himalayas of the incredible sights at those high altitudes and throughout Tibet and Mongolia and northern India. And he was the third person in this chain of investigation of the mysterious document at Himas Monastery about Jesus' lost years. In 1926, he confirmed, having been to Himas and been shown the document, I believe it was his brother who was fluent in Tibetan, and they translated it again, and they sent reports back to New York, where there is the Nicholas Roerich Museum, open today, and you can see many of these paintings. In any event, these reports confirmed the existence of these ancient documents claiming that Jesus had been to India and studied with the Buddhist lamas, been with the Hindus during those missing years. And this was published in an important New York newspaper at that time called the New York Sun. So he was number 3 in the chain of people. Then there were others. There's at least 4 other witnesses to the fact that this ancient document was at Himas. We know the document exists. We would love for it to see the light of day. And in the course of our travels to make the movie Jesus in India, this involved not only getting the film crew to Himas Monastery and talking to the top monks there, but also going to, I don't know whether to call him the Pope of Hinduism or the ultimate Archbishop of Hinduism, but his title is Shankaracharya, and he is a Jagannath, where this manuscript and where Levi Dowling's Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ both said that Jesus spent some of these lost years. We wanted an interview with the Shankaracharya, supreme authority in Hinduism, and we got it. It was extraordinary. It was impossible. We were told, he'll never see you. You'll never get your picture taken with him. You won't even get in the door. But he heard what we were making the film about, that we wanted to have an interview about. He granted the interview, and it was a fountain of information and absolutely spellbinding in his going out on a limb, if you will, to confirm all of these things that were said in these missing documents, confirming that Jesus was in India. It's part of the knowledge and tradition of the Shankaracharyas, that his office goes back to before the time of Christ, he claims, that there were ancient temples there at Jagannath. At that time, it was an ancient Hindu learning center. And that Jesus not only traveled there, but also in Benares, which we now call Varanasi, on the Ganges River, and went throughout Kashmir. There are many reports that have placed Jesus in Kashmir. He says it's true, that there are ancient documents that confirm it. Paramahansa Yogananda's successor at the Self-Realization Fellowship, her name is Sri Dayamata, she had heard this from the previous Shankaracharya on a trip to the United States, that there are ancient documents at Jagannath that confirm Jesus in India. That Shankaracharya passed away before he could write the book about it. The current Shankaracharya confirms it all, but does not readily produce the documents. So we hear him say that there is a sort of cover-up in the Christian world on this information.
But what I find even more extraordinary is that here we learn that all the books are not cataloged, and not only that, but the individual that translates has been away for 40 years.
Yeah, 50 years. Their head
50. Oh, that's right. Yeah, it's been longer. I mean, but and they will not continue.
So they stopped the translation project.
Correct.
Because
until he comes back. Now, I've dealt with a lot of skeptics in my life, and because of that, that's one of the things that they would jump on immediately. But to me, that's very reasonable, because you'd have to know about monastery life to understand how they do things.
But don't you also have to understand about Buddhism? I mean, Buddhism is a religion that looks at the infinity of time. And, 5 million years is a twinkle in the eye of creation, right? So what is 50 years? I mean, to them, they laugh and say, you're impatient because, we're slowed down by 50 years? What shameful impatience. And, of course, in the West, we do everything as quickly as we can. We have a problem. We get on it. We try to solve it. We pick up the phone. We call an expert. But in this Buddhist world, this kind of Shangri-La that is devoted to this eternal cosmic peace, things move very slowly. And it's remarkable that we have the testimonies through the years that we have that document really does exist.
Well, it's also remarkable that you brought all these guys together. I mean, here you have the Dalai Lama, and he says basically that there are conflicts in the name of religion, that religious harmony is very essential, that all traditions carry the same message of love, compassion, forgiveness, tolerance, self-discipline, and contentment, and we need a different way to approach, the different religions are a different way to approach different people with a different mental disposition.
Now, I have to say, and as a filmmaker, I wanted balance. I went to the Vatican. I spoke to Monsignor Corrado Balducci, an apostolic nuncio of John Paul II. I went to Georgetown University and spoke to two prominent Catholic professors. I spoke to a Catholic Vatican-accredited journalist, and even the Bishop of Bareilly in India. Now, from the Vatican, we hear the claim that we can only rely on Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John for reliable information about the life of Jesus, and the suspicion that any documents that exist in India would have been created later. Monsignor Corrado Balducci says falsa, falsa in Italian when confronted with all of this.
Let me also mention that he also says they are all inventions passed down through generations by the locals in India. And when he was asked if there was a motive why the holy books don't tell about Jesus' life, he says there is no certainty about this, is there? It's all hypothesis. And that's where, I mean, and also...
Well, actually, it's a translator that says that to him, that there's no, you're saying there's no certainty, that it's all hypothesis. And he didn't appreciate being pinned down, but you really hit a brick wall with that. I mean, the point is, Catholicism doesn't accept it. But when you examine his claim that this would have been made up by Hindus, let's say, in later years, let's examine it for a moment.
Nope, my boss is telling me no. We'll have to begin that examination.
We'll save them in suspense. We'll get the answer after your break.
Okay, with our guest Paul Davids, Jesus in India, a 2008 film based on Edward T. Martin's book, his new book, Jesus in India, King of Wisdom, the making of the film and new findings of Jesus' lost years, because you'll get to know Edward pretty well if you watch this DVD. And you can get a copy by go to JesusInIndiaTheMovie.com. JesusInIndiaTheMovie.com. Yes, indeed, we have not touched on many of the scholars, but I think that the way we're going about this right now will get us to just exactly where I wanted to anyway later on, because this was well researched. We'll be back in just a few minutes. And you need to get a copy of this DVD by go to JesusInIndiaTheMovie.com and check that out for yourself. JesusInIndiaTheMovie.com. What changed my life back in the old days was the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then later on, finding out this other information certainly made a dent in my head. Paul, you were talking about Father Balducci. Now, the last time I remember talking about Balducci was back there in maybe about 10 years ago, and then about 5 years ago when finally he came through with saying it's okay in the Roman Catholic tradition that extraterrestrials or UFOs are acceptable, right?
That was good. He was very forward-thinking in that way. He went to many of the UFO conferences and declared that belief in intelligent aliens visiting the Earth is not in contradiction with Catholicism.
And that you're not going to go to hell if you believe in them, right?
Exactly.
Good.
Jesus said, "My Father's house has many mansions," etc., etc. But on the issue of Jesus' travels in India, Monsignor Corrado Balducci felt that whatever documents anyone could come up with from India would surely be hoaxes that were written, long after the time of Jesus. Well, one of the problems with taking this attitude towards it is this. For those who think that these were written by Hindus to bring Christ into contact with them and therefore aggrandize Hinduism, or Buddhism, that the the translation of these purportedly ancient manuscripts have Jesus as a staunch critic of the Hindu caste system, as a troublemaker who did not approve of the Brahmins, the highest caste, exalting themselves, did not approve of the exploitation of the undercastes, such as the untouchables. And they also portrayed Jesus as having violated certain key Hindu precepts, such as that you do not read the Vedas, the holy Hindu texts, to the untouchable class. And the claim was that Jesus did that, and that Jesus also objected to the worship of idols and pointed out that all God's children were created equally and are equal in the sight of their Father, and that the Hindus nearly assassinated him, that he had to escape with his life. Now, I would say to you that this is in character with the Jesus that we know from the New Testament. It's very much in keeping with the Jesus who went into the temple in Jerusalem and overthrew the tables of the money changers, saying that you will not defile my Father's house in this way, showing a certain righteous anger and an insistence and putting his foot down on what the law was. And according to this Life of St. Issa, the best of sons of men, this ancient manuscript that puts Jesus in India, he was ultimately viewed as a troublemaker to the Orthodox Hindus. Now, would Hindus have written that? No. Would they have portrayed a Jesus who wasn't, a follower and fell into line with what they believe? No. Why would they? And then the Buddhists who hold these manuscripts, these, I purport these are honorable men of truth. They are certainly not in the business of concocting any kind of false documents. This isn't what they do. They are record keepers. Going back for thousands of years, they have faithfully recorded the words and teachings of holy men and have copied them and recopied them, just as the Christian monks in the Middle Ages copied and recopied the New Testament to keep it alive and vibrant, and old manuscripts wear out. So I feel that the evidence we found on our film, these travels in India and the people we talked to and film, is really strong support for the notion that Jesus was in India during those years. Now, you might ask, what difference does that make? And it makes a lot of difference. it implies an exposure to the so-called heathen religions of Buddhism and Hinduism, and in early Christianity, the earliest Christianity, spread by oral traditions, gospels such as the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of the apocryphal gospels of the Gnostics that was founded, that has very early sayings of Jesus, as well as the sayings that we know. There are hints of early Christianity that is closer to Hinduism in some ways, closer to Eastern religion in some ways, than the Christianity that we ended up with, after the Council of Nicaea. So it's interesting from that point of view. It's also interesting from the point of view of the second part of the story, Bob, which you hinted at in your introduction at the beginning, and that is that there are some who believe that Jesus survived the crucifixion and ended his days in Kashmir, India, which was a Jewish enclave at that time. And the film is not saying that this is true. Jesus in India, the movie, is not taking the position that this is fact. What we are doing is saying that we want to sift through, the New York Times said this about our film, that we sift through the legends and myths and the evidence, trying to separate myth from fact and evidence. And that's what we do. So we look at all of it. We look at all of these claims. It's the Ahmadiyya Muslims in particular who claim that Jesus survived the crucifixion and went back to India. It's particularly interesting how Ed Martin came across this. He was in the Peace Corps in Afghanistan and drinking beer in the commissary of the American Embassy, and he comes across a beer called Murree beer, Murrree, made in Pakistan. And he thinks to himself, this is a strange name for a beer. It's an English name. And he asks about it. He says, it's named after some English woman? And the Pakistani Christian bartender tells him, no, it's named after Mary, mother of Jesus, because she died in Pakistan when she was returning to India with Jesus. And she is buried there, and her tomb is there. And they named the town where the tomb is after her and called it Murree, a misspelling of Mary. Well, that's interesting. It turns out there is a 2,000-year-old tomb there that is revered by the locals as actually being the tomb of Mary. And it's only about 100 miles away from Kashmir, where there's a tomb of the prophet, the Rose of All, which these Ahmadiyya Muslims also believe. They believe that is the tomb of the historical Jesus. Now, Christians would reject this out of hand, but it makes an interesting inquiry. Who is buried in that tomb? And why are there ancient carvings of the feet of that prophet showing the crucifixion wounds?
Well, that segment of the film is extremely moving, especially you also were interviewing or talking with Suzanne Olson,
yes,
the author of Jesus in Kashmir.
Lost Tomb.
Yeah, she was researching what might be where Jesus' body was finally laid to rest. And her goal was to get some DNA from his body. And,
from the bones. She came very close.
Yes, she
actually.
came, yeah.
But terrorism, outbursts of violence prevented it. And we went there. I mean, the place is dangerous now in Kashmir, Srinagar. Americans should not go there. No one listening to this show should try to go there now. There's terrible violence. You could be killed. And it's on the State Department watch list. But we did go there in 2005. And there were 13 people killed in the neighborhood where we were, just like 1 or 2 days after we departed. We took a risk, and I sent my Hindu crew in to the area where that Rosabal tomb is to talk to the local Muslims. It's in a Muslim district there. About who is this prophet that they call Yuzazov, who is buried at that tomb, and it is a 2,000-year-old tomb. And Yuzazov, it has sort of the sound of Jesus. Some say the name means Jesus the Gatherer. Others say it means son of Joseph. But we don't hear much about this tomb in the West, and the story has not been told here, and we tell it and leave it to the viewer to evaluate what kind of credence you want to give to it. But Bob, I think it's important to say in all of this, very important to point out that St. Thomas, doubting Thomas, Doubting Thomas, who said unless he saw Jesus after the crucifixion and could touch his wounds, he wouldn't believe in that resurrection. And he did see the wounds, and he believed. He was sent to India by Jesus, and no one disputes this in the Christian world. As a matter of fact, we know he was in Chennai, also called Madras, for 20 years, preaching Christianity there. He brought Christianity to India. Many people in India today who are Christians describe themselves as Thomas Christians because they learned Christianity from St. Thomas. And his presence there was validated by Pope John Paul II, who went to India there, where St. Thomas Mount is, where the Basilica is, where the museum is to St. Thomas, and he went to pay homage there. So I ask you, if St. Thomas could get to India, Jesus could have gotten to India around those same decades. And if Jesus felt India was important enough to send Thomas there to spread the Gospels, then why is it so far-fetched that Jesus did this having been there himself in his youth to this great center and country of ancient philosophies and learning and great temples? Why is that regarded as so far-fetched? I don't think it is.
Well, certainly it's not. And of course, did you mention the St. Thomas Cathedral in Madras? Did you? I know you did in the film, of course, but when you were talking before, I don't know if you referred to that. The cathedral. It's quite an extraordinary place.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Beautiful.
Oh,
wow.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And of course, as you note, St.
They
Thomas.
have a tomb for St. Thomas there, where it's believed his remains were, but they've been removed. But that's where Pope John Paul II went. So there's an affinity in the Catholic tradition through this visit by St. Paul to the concept of one of Jesus' primary apostles, disciples, having been in India. So I think, none of these legends are unknown to the Catholic Church. I would like to see more openness about it. I mean, it's there's a lot of possibilities here that are not really being looked at. And here's a part of it that's kind of interesting, Bob, that the Muslims, the Ahmadiyya Muslims, say Christianity has misinterpreted an aspect of the crucifixion. But they agree with Christians about part of it. You see, they agree that Jesus offered himself up as the Lamb of God, that he offered himself as the sacrifice for mankind's sins. They don't argue with that. And it's clear from the scene in the Bible with Pilate and Jesus when he's being condemned that he's offering himself, he's offering his life. So did Jesus offer his life for mankind? Muslims and Christians can agree on that. But Jesus said a prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. He said, Father, if it's possible to let this cup pass me, please let it pass me, meaning if you can take this fate away from me of death on the cross, that's what I pray to you. Now, in Christianity, it's interpreted that God answered that prayer of his Son by saying, no, I will not grant you that prayer. You will die on the cross. The Muslims say Jesus offered his life, but God granted him that prayer because the Romans didn't finish the job. Well, that's no fault of Jesus. He did what the Messiah set out to do. He offered his life, but that they believe that he continued to live when he was put in that tomb. And the last 2,000 years have shown us many examples of people who have flatlined, people who have been thought to be dead, even 15, 20 minutes. You hear many validated stories about this from physicians, and then they're there. They're alive again. The heart starts to beat again. And what these Muslims believe is that Jesus recovered, did meet with all the disciples, that those parts of the Bible, what Jesus said there with the disciples after the crucifixion, take it as true. Take it as true that he went to Damascus and he met Paul on the road to Damascus, but that he didn't then, after 40 days, ascend to heaven to sit at the right hand of the Father. He went back to Kashmir. They believe. Again, I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying, hear it out, because Jesus did say, to this generation, I give one sign, and it is the sign of Jonah. You'll find that in the Bible. And ask yourself, what could that mean, the sign of Jonah? The Jews know that Jonah was swallowed, was inside the belly of the whale for 3 days, and he came out alive. He didn't come out dead. He didn't come out dead and resurrected. He came out alive. So there is a case to be made that there's a misinterpretation among certain branches of Christianity, and that Jesus, referring to the sign of Jonah, meant that he would live, and that he did live, and he had many more years in Kashmir that are completely unreported in the Western world. So look, there are people that think that John Wilkes Booth did not die in that barn in that fire after assassinating Lincoln, but that there was a cover-up, and he lived. And some say he went to San Francisco, boarded a boat, went to London, appeared on the stage again in London. There are people who think that Hitler didn't die in the bunker. That wasn't his body. Hitler had doubles, just like Saddam Hussein had doubles. There's people that believe it was one of his doubles that was found there, and that Hitler got out and lived out the rest of his life in South America. And if you think to yourself, just imagine if you were one of the disciples and you had seen Jesus, and the Romans thought that Jesus had been seen and he's supposed to be dead, and they come to you and say, you were seen with him. That was him, wasn't it? Well, you might say, no, that could not be him, sir, because he has gone to heaven to sit at the right hand of his Father. You see, could the cover story have become the myth that now becomes the truth?
Well, I think that's one of the important things about symbols and myths, because you can reveal and conceal depending upon what your audience knows. And we got to take a break here, and when we come back, it might be then that the ultimate goal of Jesus may have been to unite rather than to divide. Our guest is Paul Davids, Jesus in India, a 2008 film based on the book by Edward Martin, King of Travelers, Jesus' Lost Years in India. Go to JesusInIndiaTheMovie.com. This is 21st Century Radio, and I'm the alleged Dr. Bob Hieronimus, lowly PhD hanging out in this part of the universe, twisting the night away, and sometimes even twisting the date away. Our executive producer and research assistant, Laura Kortner. Our engineer is Jake Bryant. And the guest this hour is, he was with us last hour, it was Paul Davids. We're talking about the DVD Jesus in India, a 2008 film based on the book. Well, it actually is based on the book King of Travelers by Ed Martin, Jesus' Lost Years in India. But Brother Ed, as we went on, Brother Ed is an updated, new version here, Jesus in India, King of Wisdom, the making of the film and new findings on Jesus' lost year. Now, and there are a lot of important people, especially the Dalai Lama that was interviewed in this book. And that's let's touch on what the Dalai Lama shared with you, because the ultimate goal of locating these scripts was kind of foiled in a way, which we'll get to a little later on.
Yep. Is this what you'd like to get into at the moment? The
Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama, yeah.
Well, we were very fortunate to have the Dalai Lama in our film. And he wraps things up and addresses the commonalities of the great religions and the needs that they fill for mankind, and the importance of finding and creating religious harmony, because we live in a time of great disharmony and conflict. Now, the Buddhist monastery, Hemis, where we believe the manuscript in question resides, we attempted to get confirmation, and the monks we spoke to there, they neither confirm nor deny. They're well aware of the history of the stories about the document there, and they basically claim not to know where it is today there. They have a library of ancient documents, and their translation project stopped for quite some time, and they again, they're aware of it, but they say that no one individual could release that document if they found it, that it would have to be decided by committee. And they do express in the interview that you have subtitles for in the film the concern that they could be accused of a cover-up if they suddenly release this. So it's a weighty decision for them. Now, since the movie came out, I've had conversations with a couple of Westerners, two different Westerners, who were Buddhist monks in Southeast Asia at various times of their lives and were sent to Himalayas Monastery. And both of these claim that they had exposure to those documents, that they saw them, they confirm that the documents exist, and they would both like to lead expeditions back there to gain access, to photograph them. There should be scientists and linguists involved. I don't think the dating of the document is going to give us the answer, because I don't expect the document that they have there, it's in Tibetan, to prove to be more than a few hundred years old. It's supposed to be a copy of a much older document that was in the Pali language, the older language, Tibetan. But if it's a copy of that older manuscript, that older one may not exist. You know, I mean, China has had its run-in with, China has asserted its oneness with Tibet, let's put it that way. And in the process, there have been periods of violence, and there have been periods of destruction of manuscripts and monasteries, and Buddhists have undergone great hardship. So the question of what still exists that may be very, very ancient is a tough question. We may never get the final answer there, but we look for evidence and information about it wherever we can.
Is the weather damp in this area?
No, I don't think that these ancient manuscripts are. They aren't damaged, and they don't decay the way that they would in more humid places. It's a very rarefied atmosphere, and that's a good atmosphere for for preservation. Some of the ancient documents, you'll see them in the film, are actually sort of cut into a. It looks like stone. It looks like small stone tablets, and then others are on a sort of a leathery substance. It might be a papyrus-like substance. But, the scientists haven't been welcomed in there to study this. We haven't had the kind of access to that has been had with, let's say, the Gnostic Gospels that were found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, in 1948, I think it was. Yeah. Many Gospels found there. Or the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in very bad condition, but, preserved, studied, translated. This is the work to get these kinds of answers. But, to the critics who say, Paul, you're engaged in biblical revisionism. Why go there? Why are you doing that? People regard the Bible as holy and sacrosanct and the Word of God. Why is this kind of examination even appropriate? Well, I'd say, first of all, there's a great deal of biblical scholarship that goes on today that is investigation of the sources for the New Testament. Elaine Pagels of Princeton University appears in our film and discusses the Gospel of Thomas at length. So it's a valid inquiry, but also it's not revisionism when you're filling a hole. Those 18 years of Jesus are simply not there. It's a black hole. And you can't revise something that isn't there. You could attempt to repair an omission, you see. He had to have been somewhere for those 18 years. Now there are some in the film, such as the Vatican-accredited journalist, a devout Catholic named Michael Hesseman. And Michael Hesseman, who's engaged in some extraordinary biblical studies, I respect him very much, he believes that Jesus was in a kind of monastic community in Judea during those years. A monastic community where you do not cut your hair with the scissors, where you totally devote your life to God. And he says, look, as a Catholic, it doesn't upset him theologically if it's eventually proven that Jesus was in India. He says, why should it? The Gospel of John says that you couldn't fill all the books of the world with all of the things about the life of Christ. So why should that be such a surprise if it turns out to be true? But he says, as Christians, why should we believe it unless we have compelling evidence for it? So I've presented all the evidence we can find at this date, and I'm not telling my viewers what to believe. I'm asking them, does this constitute compelling evidence for you? And I think a lot of viewers do feel that there's compelling evidence and that the years have been filled in and that this broadens, in a beautiful way, the story of the life of Christ. And speaking of the beauty, Bob, you see all the biblical art that we have in the movie?
It's extraordinary, the whole thing from that standpoint.
So not only the Dalai Lama, but also Paramahansa Yogananda.
Oh, the big guy.
Brought this, a great Hindu master who brought this message. He wrote Autobiography of a Yogi. He founded the Self-Realization Fellowship, which, by the way, has endorsed our film by not only having a page devoted to it at their website, calling it groundbreaking, but I was invited to go to the Mother Center of Self-Realization Fellowship in Los Angeles, and we showed the film to 40 monastics there, both monks and nuns, and what a standing ovation we received. Now, one of the representatives of Self-Realization Fellowship is in the film, Brother Chidananda of their publications division, and he provides a sort of a linking thread throughout the movie of pulling the different aspects of the story of the missing document together, but also points out that Yogananda himself claimed that the three magi of the book of Matthew were from India. We always know that these were magi from the East. That's what it says in the Bible. As children, we sing, "We three kings of Orient are," right? Bearing gifts, treasures from afar. But there's nothing in the Bible that says that they were kings. So they were magi, wise men, astrologers. In India, they would say rishis, or elevated souls. And the gifts were gold, incense, and myrrh. And the Indians, the people of India, point out that those three gifts in combination are a gift that is part of their tradition to give to high, elevated souls known to be such at birth. So this is the claim of Yogananda, that a pull from India existed in Jesus' life from the earliest moments of his life. And it's reasonable to assume that at the age of 12 or 13 that he might have repaid that visit. After all, at 13 in the Jewish religion, one has a male has a bar mitzvah, becomes a man according to tradition, and then becomes married at 13. Back in the days of Jesus, there would have been matchmakers. He wouldn't have gotten to age 14 without being married. If
That's
he had
correct,
stayed
yes.
there.
Let's return to that after a break with our guest, Paul David's Jesus in India. And, of course, this is a film based on the book by Edward Martin. And Jesus in India, the movie.com. And, of course, I think you wanted to mention something about the two books of Edward Martin and the soundtrack in the movie.
Yes, I mean, you've talked about how the book was inspired by Ed's first book, how the movie was inspired by King of Travelers, Jesus' Lost Years in India.
Mm-hmm.
And you pointed out that Ed was on the show, what was it, around 2002 or so?
2000.
The year 2000. That was soon after that book came out. And that book went out of print for a number of years. And my work in connection with the movie has been to get the book reissued, revised, updated, and so it's available again now. King of Travelers, Jesus' Lost Years in India. You can get that at JesusInIndiaTheMovie.com. But the important thing also is that there is a second book by Ed that I think he did just a terrific job that deals with how this remarkable movie was made. I mean, during our months in India, he was writing all the time. The adventure, how did we get to see the people that we got to, what were the dangers, what were the obstacles, and what did we learn along the way. And when he presented that manuscript to me, I then wrote a foreword to it to put it all in perspective, and then an afterword to tell about the parts of making the movie after we got back from India, because we weren't done by any means. I went to London to talk to Arif Khan of the tombofjesus.com website. I went to Italy, the Vatican, talked to Monsignor Corrado Balducci. I went to Princeton University, spoke to professor and best-selling author Elaine Pagels. Dr. Paul Fleischman, a famous author up in Amherst, contributed. Then I went to the Rourke Museum in New York, then on to Georgetown University, where professors Anthony Tambasco and Alan C. Mitchell contributed to the film. And I even went to Texas to talk to the fundamentalists in Ed's hometown who had rejected him for having spent so much time inquiring about Jesus in India and for having written a book about it. And they spoke and are in the film. And in the afterword, I included all the information about what was necessary to do to complete the film and to get it out. And it's been nationally released on the Sundance Channel, which has been quite extraordinary. That second book is called Jesus in India, King of Wisdom. And the subtitle is The Making of the Film and New Findings on Jesus' Lost Years. So we have all of that available at the website, one click away, and also the CD of the music soundtrack. Bob, I have to ask you, what did you think of the music of the movie?
Well, I loved it, and especially because when you have to pause and stop on the, what's it called, the front page?
The menu page.
Thank you. I'm not too tired. But the menu page, you didn't keep playing the same music. It always changed, and that I greatly appreciated, because that's when I was able to hear larger segments of the musical production.
Well, even at the website, as soon as you enter the website, we have 6 minutes of music from the soundtrack, so everyone can get the flavor of it. It's a soundtrack that was done by composer Brian Lambert, who's so gifted. He's an extraordinary musician. He also did the music soundtrack for my last film called The Sci-Fi Boys, which is another DVD out there. That one's out from Universal. And he's so talented, I hope to work with him again and again. But we did put all the music onto a CD to make it available to. I think there are even sites out there where you can download it, number by number of the different musical numbers. But it's very nice to have the CD.
Yes, indeed.
Soothing as you're driving. Hey, Bob, one thing we haven't talked about, you keep mentioning the Maryland Film Festival. When are we going to talk about the fact that I am a Marylander and proud of it?
Well, you began talking about it, and of course, our good friend, the director of it, is Jed Dietz. And Jed, I can't wait to get him copies. I'm going to be, fortunately, you sent us some extras.
I grew up in Garrett Park, went to Garrett Park Elementary School, and then I went to Kensington Junior High School in Kensington, Maryland. That school no longer exists. Then I lived in Bethesda, and I'm a graduate of Walter Johnson High School there. So all my formative years were spent in Maryland. And my father was a professor for 40 years at Georgetown University. That's why we stuck so close to the Washington area.
Yeah, I can see why now. Now it begins to all fall together. Well, indeed. But I still had a couple other questions here, because obviously your work should be shown here in a future Maryland Film Festival. I'm looking forward to seeing those other pieces, because I've been buried in other things now. But according to Ed Martin, Jesus studied both the Hindus and the Buddhists. What do you think he learned from those religions?
Well, he certainly would have been exposed to time-honored beliefs in the East that are not present in mainstream Judaism, having to do with reincarnation. However, I understand that the Kabbalah, the mystical division or aspect of Judaism, does have reincarnation as an element.
Yes, indeed, it
but
does.
The question of us having many lives and coming back again and again would have been one of the issues dealt with deeply as a result of exposure to Hinduism and Buddhism that didn't survive as part of Christianity after the Council of Nicaea. At the end of 4 centuries of Christianity, it was became dogma that we have one life, and you go to one place or you go to the other. Now, another aspect of the Eastern religion is the feminine as well as the masculine aspect of God. In Judaism, I don't think it's fair to say that there's equality between men and women certainly in ancient Judaism, and the sexes are separated in the synagogue, and but in Hinduism, you have this aspect of the Divine Mother. Yeah. You have the Heavenly Father, the Divine Mother. You have a female aspect to God, and this does show up in the Gospel of Thomas. It's definitely there. So this is something that could be an inheritance from Eastern religion. Also, I think one aspect that did make it into the Bible, the quotation, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be filled with light." That is in the New Testament, and in the world of the yogis, they feel that applies to the practice of yogic meditation, where making the eye single, the concentration at the point between the eyebrows, contributes to bringing an elevated spiritual state of expanded or cosmic consciousness. And in Hinduism, they demonstrate this by actually painting a little red dot on the forehead.
Correct.
You see that among Hindus, and that's what that replies to, the third eye. If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. And there it is in the New Testament, and there it is in Hinduism.
And there it is on the back of the $1 bill, on the Great Seal of the United States, the
single eye
in the triangle. And it's extremely important because, one of the things, there are 2 things that our founding fathers really screwed up in setting up our Constitution. One dealt with the divine feminine, and recognizing, like they should have from the League of the Iroquois and from the Cherokee especially, that the women literally were in charge. They were the ones that voted in, the chiefs voted them out, owned things, controlled things, etc., and kept the peace. We rejected the women from that perspective altogether. And then also, when you take a look at this aspect, the Native Americans also said that it was impossible for our nation to survive or continue long if we had slaves. We rejected both of those things. And so someday in the future, and I don't think it's going to come out of Hollywood anywhere too soon, is going to be the story, the real story, about how the divine feminine, the League of the Iroquois, and especially when you get into the Jewish aspect of the same work that my wife has done in the Kabbalah and the divine feminine within the Kabbalah, is really going to hit maybe another 10, 15 years. I don't know how long it's going to take.
But look at the progress we've made on both of those fronts.
Yeah, we've made a lot of progress over the past 40, 45 years.
No more slavery in our country, and the status of women, and progress. Great progress in spite of all the things that held us back for centuries.
So was Jesus' ultimate goal really to unite all religions and nations?
Well, I think Father Baptiste, the Bishop of Borelli, said it really well when he said that Jesus didn't set out to found a religion. What he founded was a way of life. And what he was most interested in this way of life, is that all people should be able to have a relationship with their Heavenly Father and attempt to attain heaven through this relationship with the Heavenly Father. And he always spoke of my Father who art in heaven. And I think if you catch on to that, you got it all.
Well, I can't add to that because I think you're about 122% correct there. You've just passed your final exam, and now you have 5 PhDs, right. And that'll increase your income by 10 cents. Except now you got to pay all the bills for for getting there. Thank you. Please hang on the phone after we leave there, Paul. But thank you very much for joining us. This is an extraordinary piece of work.
I tell people, visit us at JesusInIndiaTheMovie.com. I think you will be enriched by it. JesusInIndiaTheMovie.com. 21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. Our engineer is Anita Brockington, and I'm Dr. Bob Hieronimus.